Greetings all, Raphael X here with another video. Please subscribe to my channel, click on the like button, click on the notifications button, share this video, all that good stuff. Alright, but before we start, as always, let's begin with a prayer. My last video didn't begin with a prayer because it was badly edited, but in this video we are. Okay, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostre. Amen. Ave Maria, sede sapientia, ora pro nobis, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Okay, in this video, I'm going to address a liturgical problem, a kind of scare for the traditionalists, and I consider myself a traditional Catholic, but not the rad trad Catholic. So some of my friends are going to be kind of upset about this video, but I'm not going to say too many things. I mean, we can definitely go down the rabbit hole of liturgical reform or the history of the Roman Rite, right, or liturgy in general, which is a very interesting rabbit hole in the 2000 year history of the church, but we have no time to do that here. So it's just going to be a 20-minute video. I don't want it to go over, but we're going to address certain topics. The main topic being that there are renewed fears that Pope Francis will suppress the traditional Latin Mass. So he has expressed before his kind of antagonism towards the Mass, calling traditional Catholics rigid, and in a certain sense, he does, or he can have a point, in the sense that the traditional Catholics, they have the temptation, right, the rad trads, to be to fall into externalism, or also known as formalism, which is the sin of the Pharisees. Really, Jesus came to, when he came, he condemned the Pharisees for their external practices. And right, many of the Jews also were practicing this, the external practices, focusing on the external practices to the detail, but without an interior spirit. And this can happen, this can be a big temptation for the rad trads. Rad trads means radical traditional, for those who don't know. So rad trads, right, the extreme right, if you will. This way's right. So that can be a temptation to focus on the exterior, but being devoid of the interior life, as opposed to the left, right, where we have the modernists. Modernism is already a heresy, where we have an immanentism, where we focus so much on the interior that we say, oh, the exterior doesn't matter, right? I'm living an interior. I don't go to Mass. I don't practice my faith. I don't believe in any of the church's teachings, the faith or morals, but I live it interiorly, right? It's a fabricated faith. And it's the immanentism of modernism. So that's the left. So you have the liberals that focus on charity, right? You have a misguided charity. And then you have on the right, right, the extreme conservatives or extreme traditionalists that focus on justice, right? The following of the letter of the law, in a sense, following the law without an interior spirit. So there has to be, right, a combination of two. We have to, the external is important, like Jesus says, do that, but also have the interior spirit. So there's definitely a balance here. So Pope Francis did have a point, in a sense, that traditionalists can be rigid, but no, they're not all rigid, right? Tradition is good, and to be Catholic, you have to be essentially traditional, as it is a source of divine revelation. All right, so why are these fears being renewed? Because there's this blogger from Missa Latina, and apparently it is a legit source. And he wrote about, let me see here, he alleges that the Pope told the Italian bishops at the opening of their General Assembly recently, this is the 74th Assembly, I believe, in Rome, or near Rome, in Italy. Yes, I believe it was in Rome, that he had finished the third draft of a document that will restrict the use of the extraordinary form of the Mass. Now, it's important to note that the extraordinary form of the Mass is the traditional Latin Mass. A lot of those traditional Catholics do not like the terms extraordinary form of the Mass. This comes from Benedict XVI, Summorum Pontificum, the Apostolic Letter, which we'll mention briefly today. Or the Trinity Mass, which also is really not it's not exact, because the Trinity Mass went through certain changes, right? Pope Clement changed it, Pope Pius X, other popes, Pope Gregory, I believe, but there's been some change. So it's not exactly at the Trinity Mass. And in Trinity Mass, right, Pope Pius V did not create the Mass. He promulgated it. He promulgated it and getting it from older elements, if you will, right? They say the Mass actually dates around Gregory the Great or before. So the traditional Latin Mass was not made in the Council of Trent, 16th century. So we're going to use interchangeably extraordinary Mass, extraordinary form of the Mass, or a traditional Latin Mass. It's the language the churches use. So again, I do not want to go down the rabbit hole of the Roman Rite. It's very interesting. There's many books written on the subject, so I advise you to study it. Study is very important. So it is true, though, that the traditional Latin Mass, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mass, a little bit about the history of the very recent history, John Paul II, Benedict XVI, of what's been going on with the traditional Latin Mass. Very recent. I'll be talking about it in brief sense. And then we're going to address, again, the article that recently came out, Renewing These Fears. I go to traditional Catholic Mass, so I think is objectively superior Mass. It's more reverent. It does focus more on the sacrifice, right? It does have this vertical element as opposed to the horizontal element. Its prayers are superior. I mean, you read the offertory prayers of this traditional Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo, the new Mass, the Mass of Paul VI, promulgated in 1970. Is superior. The prayers are superior. A lot was suppressed for the new Mass. So the new Mass does have certain elements, does have certain good elements, right? Like the prayer of the faithful, which is very ancient. So I'm not, my position is not the new Mass is demonic. The Mass of Paul VI is demonic. No, that's not my position. But the Catholic Mass it emits a purely Catholic spirit. I remember a Protestant, he has like three PhDs, and he went to a Catholic Mass once. He's very open Protestant to other denominations, especially Catholicism. So he went to traditional Catholic Mass, and he was totally awed. He said, "Wow, this is something different. This is imbued with mystery. There's something mysterious going on." And the traditional Catholic Mass, I believe, is very apt for today because of that thirst of mystery that man essentially has, and that everything, right, the exponential increase of science is really is helping us to notice, in a sense, this emptiness that we have. So there's this desire of mystery increasing as science is increasing, and that's why a lot of people are turning into, right, spiritism, right, astrology, all that, psychics and all that, witch doctors. So that we have this desire of mystery, and the traditional Catholic Mass, right, it fulfills that desire. So you're seeing a lot of young people go to traditional Catholic Mass. The new Mass, 1970, it focuses on fraternity and banquet, right? The meal. There's no altar, really. The altar's a block. The altar has become a table, right, with a cloth. There was a cloth also on the altar, but the altar should be a block. It's a place of sacrifice. But the Mass now, the new Mass, focuses on the banquet, and the Mass is essentially, it is a banquet, but it is more essentially, if we will, primarily it is a sacrifice. It is the unbloody sacrifice at Calvary, offered in a sacramental way, in a most real way. Christ, his very same sacrifice, offered unbloody to the Father. So it's very important. In the Mass, we are, since the sacrifice of Christ transcends history, in the Mass we are representing, not representing in the way we use it colloquially, presenting again in its original sense of the word, presenting again the very sacrifice of Christ. We are in Calvary in Christ, in a very spiritual but real sense, in a sacramental sense. So it's not like spiritual is not real, it's very real. So, um, yeah, so the traditional Latin Mass kind of, it brings this out better. It just does. The priest not facing the people ad orientem, the language in Latin, which Latin has an intrinsic beauty to it. The gestures of the priest, the prayer, the symbolism, the incense, right? In the thurible, the Gregorian chant, all these things. Now, can Novus Ordo, there's a question, can Novus Ordo be celebrated in a traditional form? And yes, and I believe so. A lot of traditionalists or radtrads reject Novus Ordo altogether. But I think Novus Ordo can be celebrated in traditional form. The form is important, right? If you had ad orientem, where as they say vulgarly, the priest with his backs to the people, and Latin and ad orientem are essential, I believe, in my view. The readings in vulgar language, you know, we're not definitely have to be in the vulgar language, but in the traditional Latin Mass, they also read them, right, for Sundays before the homily. But I'm not going to get down that rabbit hole. You can find even YouTube videos, tons of it on that. But if we see the history, the recent history, right, see how the liturgical form came to be, right after Vatican II, Paul VI names Annibal Bugnini, Archbishop, who was actually kicked out of his. I think he was a teacher. He was. I think he was. I think I have it here. He was. I wrote it. I wrote it down. He was deemed a progressive, and many believed him to be a Mason. Right? This is under John the 23rd, and he was kicked out from some high position university. I believe he was a professor there. So So he actually started making changes in the liturgy before Vatican II under Pius XII. He was appointed the Secretary of Commission for the liturgical reform. So this is Annibal Bugnini. He is the one in charge of the liturgical reform. Now, a lot of the criticism is that he did not apply correctly the Sacrosanto Concilium, the Constitution of Vatican II. Right? He kind of just went off on a tangent with this gleeful, you know, this gleeful sense, if you will, of modernization, right? This total affinity for change, which you see among progressives and among liturgists. So be careful. So Bugnini is going to be named by Paul VI. He's in charge of reforming the Mass, right? Implementing Vatican II and reforming the Mass. So he is going to be the secretary of this concilium, which is going to be a group of theologians and prelates, right, and clergy essentially, that will be in charge of making up this new Mass, essentially. Confectioning, as I said, confeccionando, as you say in Spanish, right? I think the confection, I'm not sure if you say that in English. So, but what's interesting in this group, there were 6 Protestants. A lot of people have, 6 Protestants and these traditional Protestants. And a lot of these traditional Protestants were very against the Mass being something as a sacrifice, essentially. We're against the Mass being a sacrifice. We're against that. So that is, that is pretty problematic. And there were 6 Protestants. Let me see here. Yeah, 6 Protestants appointed by Bugnini. Some of them were Lutherans. I think there was 1 or 2 Lutherans. There were 2 Calvinists. So again, the Mass not a sacrifice. So the Novus Ordo, the new Mass, is Protestantized. It simply is. We know that Protestants, especially traditional Protestant denominations, outright deny the sacrificial element of the Mass, right, as Luther and Calvin explicitly did. So you can imagine the type of liturgy that came from this concilium. Yet, of course, God always protects his church. So again, Novus Ordo, the new Mass that comes from there, is in inferior right in the sense that it doesn't emit a pure Catholic spirit, in the sense that it's not focused on the sacrificial, the most important part of the Mass. Even in the language today, when's the last time you heard, we're going to celebrate the holy sacrifice of the Mass, the holy sacrifice? No, they call it Eucharist, right? They call it, I've heard banquet before, or just simply mass. All right, so let's go here. It's also important to note that in the traditional Latin Mass, you always use, the canon. In the Novus Ordo, you have four Eucharistic prayers, and you barely use the canon, which is the first one. This is where the consecration's taking place. The prayers before and afterwards, when people are kneeling down. So the Novus Ordo, I think, the new Mass, I think you're supposed to use it 2 times a year. That is Holy Thursday and Corpus Christi, if I'm not mistaken. I know some priests who celebrate the Novus Ordo who do it frequently, and I think that because that's the original canon, and that's from the traditional Latin Mass, the canon, which is longer. It's really important to study up on these things, especially for us Catholics. We have to know this. The liturgy is essential to our life, right? Liturgy is, you know, is it sustains us in our faith. Our devotion has to be based on liturgy. Okay, so what happens after 1970? A lot of people complain, and then you have Lefebvre. Essentially, I'm not getting into his history. I'm just giving a very overview. Right, he rebels, and it essentially has to do with the Mass. But kind of Saint John Paul II, Saint John Paul II, he sees this, and he gives permission. The Church is a mother, so he does give permission for certain priests to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass because many saw the Novus Ordo, the new Mass, as scandalous, and and they do have a lot of reason to believe so because of its effects, and also because of the proliferation of options that were allowed priests. They really took advantage of it and abused it. Some priests really didn't follow any of the rubrics of the Missal and did what they wanted to do. So the first apostolic letter, this was 1984, a year after I was born. So you can guess what year I was born, obviously. Quator ab inc annos, which is 4 years ago. This document granted the first indult or permission since the Ordo Missae, the Novus Ordo, the new Mass of 1970 of Paul VI. Actually, the first permission was granted by Paul VI to a group of priests in England, 1970. So this is the first apostolic letter, more official, John Paul II, 1984. And then in 1988, John Paul II, he writes the apostolic letter Ecclesia Dei. It's short, but you should definitely read it. It's important. And this is to response to the illicit ordination of bishops by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. Right, Lefebvre is the French way of saying it, and that was in the same year, some months ago, 1988. So he ordained certain bishops, and that incurred an automatic excommunication, right? Or schism, rather. Schism is the crime, excommunication is the penalty. So, yes, you need permission from the Holy See to ordain bishops. So he didn't do that, and that is objectively something bad he did. I think the man was acting by his conscience. He really saw what, you know, he really saw the disaster of the liturgy taking place, but he did act wrongly, objectively speaking. Okay, and your conscience has to be conformed to objective law. So, I don't know how you justify that. So I'm just going to read some certain points from Ecclesia Dei. So John Paul II, so we know what's going on. He writes this apostolic letter in response to the illicit ordination. So I'm going to read something from Ecclesia Dei. And again, you should read it. It's important. In the present circumstances, I wish especially to make an appeal both solemn and heartfelt, paternal and fraternal, to all those who until now have been linked in various ways to the movement of Archbishop Lefebvre. He's reaching out to those who went with Archbishop Lefebvre. And this is the founder of SSPX, the Society of Pius X. That they may fulfill the grave duty of remaining united to the Vicar of Christ in the unity of the Catholic Church, right? They separated through schism, or schism, rather. Schism. Some people say schism. I think the correct way is say schism. They separated because of the illicit ordinations. and they were holding on to him. And he also, even though he signed the Vatican II documents, he essentially rebelled against the constitutions of Vatican II. So again, I'm not going down that rabbit hole. Interesting one though. And of ceasing their support in any way for that movement. Everyone should be aware that formal adherence to the schism is a grave offense against God and carries the penalty of excommunication decreed by the Church's law. So, Benedict XVI took away excommunication, but the crime of schism is still there. He took away the penalty, but the crime is still there. Some people say, oh, they're not schismatic anymore because of Benedict XVI. No. He took away, their status is still schismatic, but he took away the excommunications, the penalty. Taking account of the importance and complexity of the problems referred to this document, by virtue of my apostolic authority, I decree the following. So this is the indult he's going to give, the permission. He's going to give, okay, a lot of people, there's this huge group that's separated from the church that want to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass. I'm going to give you permission to do that. Quoting. A commission, so this is what John Paul II decrees in Ecclesia Dei. A commission is instituted whose task it will be to collaborate with the bishops, with the departments of the Roman Curia, and with the circles concerned, for the purposes of facilitating full ecclesial communion of priests, seminarians, religious communities, or individuals until now linked in various ways to the fraternity founded by Monsignor Lefebvre, SSPX, who may wish to remain united to the successor Peter in the Catholic Church, while preserving their spiritual and liturgical traditions. So we're going to have different communities coming up from this. Some communities actually leaving SSPX, like the Fraternity of St. Peter. Those were SSPX, but they came back to the church thanks to John Paul II, to the Vicar of Christ, right? They came back to the union, to the Holy See. So permission was granted to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass instead of Novus Ordo Mass or the Mass of Paul VI, yet the bishop's permission was needed. So you did need permission from the bishop, but there was, more allowance, The permission was granted. It was broader than the 1984 indult. So this indult was broader, and with permission of the bishop, you could celebrate traditional Latin Mass. So again, many of Lefebvre's society, they formed the FSSP, the Society of St. Peter, and other ecclesial Dei communities came up. They were granted the indult also. All right. So let's fast forward now to 2007. That was a very happy year where Benedict XVI says, all right, he writes the letter, apostolic letter, Summorum Pontificum, and it's actually a motu proprio, which is basically the same thing. So the motu proprio is called Summorum Pontificum, and it is it's going to allow anyone to celebrate the Latin Mass, any cleric, of course, within the Catholic Church, without the permission of the bishop. In it, which a Catholic should read, the Pope granted greater freedom for the celebration of the TLM, traditional Latin Mass. Permission is not even necessary for a celebration. In the document, so these were the distinctions, the ordinary form is the new Mass. The extraordinary form is the traditional Latin Mass. And this is the first time they come up. The Pope argues that both rites mutually enrich each other and the faithful. The permission is granted to all liturgies, so this is not just the Mass, but all the sacraments and the sacramentals. I mentioned in my prior video that exorcists have told me directly that the old rite of exorcism is much more efficient than the new rite of exorcism. So that permission was granted you do not need permission from the bishops. Right, the sacrament, exorcism is a sacramental. The blessings, the rites, the funeral rites, all that, and all sacraments, the baptism, matrimony, you can celebrate all the traditional, the one prior to 1970, or according to 1962 Missal of John the 23rd. So a multiproprio, as I said before, is basically an apostolic letter. So this is the situation now. We do have a wider range of, we do have both of the rites. A lot of people now can go to traditional Latin Mass not too far from their house. And actually, according to what Benedict XVI wrote, the priest should, in a way, they should, if people ask for it, they should learn the traditional Latin Mass. All right, so fast forward to today. Pope Francis, he is essentially against the traditional Latin Mass. He's made many comments about it, and there's always been fears that he's going to suppress it. Now, according to this Missa Latina, which is actually kind of funny, Messo in Latino it's a Italian article, blogger, and he actually writes, Dopo Mose il Liberatore, ritornerebbe il Faraone. So I speak Spanish, so Italian. I was in Italy, and Spanish saved my life. So it's very similar. Not, I mean, there's some words that don't coincide, but so it says after the Moses liberator, the Pharaoh would return. So Moses the liberator is referring to Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis is the Pharaoh, essentially, according to this blogger, and it seems to be uh, a legit source. So, yeah, many people are right fearful that Francis will suppress the traditional Latin Mass. He will suppress Summorum Pontificum, and he's actually working on a document. I even heard from others that by July, right, next month, essentially, well, we're still in May, but in July, the document will come out. So what will happen if he suppresses Summorum Pontificum, the motu proprio Benedict XVI? We will go back to Ecclesia Dei, the indult, where you need permission from the bishop. If he suppresses all of the permission granted, then the traditional Latin Mass will be suppressed, and that is a scary thing. That's a scary thing. I know people, especially recent, um, converts who have felt very enlightened, who have received a really strong conversion, right? A tumbativa conversion, if you will, a conversion that has knocked them out, that you really don't see in the new Mass, which is watered down. It is Protestantized. It is inferior, right? I do go to Novus Ordo, usually not on Sundays, but on the weekday, right? I would go because traditional Latin Mass is not as near to me, though I'd rather prefer that. But it is something scary, essentially. It is something scary, and it's something that it looks like it is going to happen. So what do we do? This is important. What do we do? We essentially have to obey. The Pope is the supreme authority when it comes to liturgical matters, and you know, holding on to the traditional Latin Mass, of course, is good. It's a superior right, but the liturgy does evolve. The liturgy does evolve. There are permanent liturgical values, right? There's a substantial element to liturgy, elements in liturgy where they can't change, right? The matter and the form. And there's other elements that shouldn't change, that could but shouldn't, like the canon, or maybe the offertory prayers, things of this importance, the creed, right? The glory, maybe a little more incidentally. And then there's the accidental change in liturgy that can change and should change, because also the liturgy is not only comprised of permanent liturgical values, but there's also historical values here, right? And the church confronts these historical values and needs to change. And needs to change to express better the symbols for man in the historical context, modern man, right? It's that's the liturgy is never definitive. The liturgy is never perfect. It's never going to perfectly express the earthly liturgy, right? The liturgy on earth, because symbolic, is never going to perfectly express what it means, right? The reality that it signifies. Liturgy is a, a, a bunch of symbols that represent signify and realize supernatural realities, right? Culminating in the sacrifice of the Mass, what we have in the Eucharist, right? The body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. So, with a lot of traditionalists want to cite the bull of Pius the Fifth, the Quo Primum, but there's no. He's in Quo Primum. Pius the Fifth, he makes it obligatory to celebrate the Mass, the 1570 Mass, which is the Trinity Mass, the traditional Latin Mass. Right. For our sake, we're going to say that we're going to use those terms now, and that no one can change it. No one can change it. So, but that doesn't refer to the Pope. It doesn't say explicitly Pius V saying no Pope could change the Mass that I'm codifying now. He doesn't say that. That it would be absurd. Pius V is not superior to any Pope. Maybe in holiness, but his office is the same. He's not superior to Pope Francis in reference to the Petrine office. So Pope Pius cannot, Pius V, Saint Pius V, actually, he cannot bind future popes. So if you read Quo Primum, it says cardinals, prelates, right, clergymen, they cannot change this mass that I'm promulgating. That's what the Quo Primum says. But the Pope has the ultimate authority. Remember, the Church is monarchical. It's a monarchy. It's not democratic. It's a monarchy. All right, so we'll end it there. I don't want to go too long. Hopefully you're able to follow. This is more for maybe my traditionalist Catholic friends or those who are more interested towards liturgy. But it's important. Hear this, and let's just pray. I pray that Pope Francis does not suppress the Latin Mass, as you should too, even if you don't attend it. Attend the Latin Mass. Attend the Latin Mass. You will see. You would get this pure Catholic spirit that comes through God's grace. All right, well, I'll end it there. And again, please subscribe and click on notifications button. And I'll see you later. God bless. Bye now.